The train tore through the night like a wounded beast, its wheels shrieking against the rails as fire devoured the rear cars. Smoke coiled through shattered windows, glowing orange an inferno inside. A woman stumbled down the aisle, clutching a swaddled infant against her chest. Her dress was singed, her hair tangled with soot, but her grip on the child was fierce and unyielding. Behind her, a man forced open a jammed door, his hat gone, his face streaked with ash and blood. His voice broke through the roar of the flames. "Jump!" She hesitated, looking back at the collapsing corridor. The baby's cries were shrill, desperate. Sparks ran around them. The heat was unbearable. "Leave me!" she shouted, choking on the smoke. "Save our baby." The man's jaw clenched, eyes narrowing against the firelight. He tore off his duster and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Not without you." The floor shuddered beneath them. In a single motion, he lifted her and the child and leapt from the train as it screamed around a curve, plunging into the canyon below. They hit the ground hard, rolling through dirt and scrub. The train derailed in the distance with a deafening crash, a cascade of metal and flame. He lay still for a moment, chest heaving, before pushing himself up and crawling to her side. She was unconscious, breathing shallowly. The baby whimpered, still alive. The sky above them was a dull gray, dawn struggling to break through smoke. The scent of burning iron and wild sage filled the air. He wiped soot from the child's face with the edge of his sleeve and looked toward the horizon. The land stretched out empty and merciless. Red rock, broken fences, the faint shimmer of heat rising from the canyon floor. He gathered the woman and child into his arms, staggering to his feet. Every step was pain. His boots sank into loose gravel as he made his way down the canyon trail. Buzzards circled overhead, black specks against the lightening sky. He didn't look up. He just walked. By the time the sun climbed above the ridge, his shirt was soaked with blood and sweat. The child had fallen quiet, spent from crying. The woman stirred faintly, whispering something he couldn't understand. Her lips were cracked, her skin pale beneath the grime. "Hold on," he muttered. "We're near shelter." He wasn't certain of that, but memory guided him. The canyon bent north, where a stream still ran through the valley. He followed it to an old ranch house, half rotten but standing. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Dust lay thick over everything inside. He laid the woman on a cot and checked her pulse. Slow but steady, he poured water from his canteen onto a rag and cleaned her wounds. When she stirred again, he offered her a sip. She drank greedily, eyes fluttering open. The first thing she did was reach for the baby. He placed a bundle in her arms, and for a brief moment, the world grew quiet. Her gaze met his, dark eyes, fierce beneath exhaustion. "Who are you?" she rasped. "Just someone who wasn't ready to watch another fire win." She frowned, trying to sit up. "You could have left me there." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the window, watching the smoke rising far off where the train had burned. "Could have," he said finally, but didn't. The ranch was silent, except for the creak of the windmill outside. He rummaged through what was left of the kitchen, rusted tins, broken crockery, a half-empty whiskey bottle. He poured some on his arm where a burn had blistered, wincing but saying nothing. She watched him closely, her expression unreadable. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated. "You can call me Cole." "And the baby?" he asked quietly. Her lips parted, but she hesitated. "Lie," she said finally, her voice soft. "His father was a railroad foreman." She stopped there, eyes dropping to the child. "He died when the company came after us." Cole said nothing. He understood too well the way corporations carved lives apart for land and profit. He'd once ridden with men who'd burned out settlers for the same reason. When he'd realized what he was part of, he walked away, or tried to. The woman leaned back, still trembling. "That train, they were taking us west. Said it was protection. Said the past wouldn't follow." Cole poured her a little water and shook his head. Men who make promises and smoke don't mean to keep them. Outside, the wind shifted, bringing the scent of rain. Clouds were building over the mountains, bruised purple against the fading light. He stepped onto the porch, eyes scanning the horizon. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Inside, she hummed softly to the baby, a tune nearly lost under the sound of the wind. He listened without turning around, that quiet melody threading through the dry air like something fragile. As night fell, he lit the old stove and found a can of beans. They ate in silence, the firelight painting their faces in flickering amber. The baby slept, small hands curled near his mother's heart. Cole finally spoke. "You got anyone looking for you?" She shook her head slowly. "Nah, who'd help?" Her tone darkened. "Those men on the train, they weren't taking me to safety. They were finishing what they started." He studied her. "Meaning?" Her eyes met his, steady now. "Meaning someone doesn't want me alive. I stole something from them, a ledger, proof of what they've done. The towns they burned, the land they took." Cole leaned back, the chair creaking under him. "And you thought a train would take you far enough to hide?" "I thought fire couldn't chase me twice." She gave a hollow laugh. "Guess I was wrong." He looked toward the sleeping child. "They'll come again." "I know." Their eyes held for a long moment, the silence thick between them. In that stillness, a quiet understanding passed, a shared weariness of people who both lost too much. Later, when she slept, he sat by the door, rifle resting across his knees. The fire crackled low, throwing restless shadows across the walls. He tried not to think of the serpent insignia he'd seen branded onto the leather satchels of the railroad guards years ago. The same mark, he was sure, he glimpsed stitched onto the baby's blanket. His hand tightened on the rifle. He didn't yet know what this woman carried, or why she'd been hunted, but the smell of danger hung around her like the smoke that still clung to their clothes. Outside, coyotes called to one another across the plain. Cole stayed awake through the night, every sound sharp, every shadow a potential threat. At some point, the baby stirred and began to cry softly. He looked over. She was already awake, whispering gentle words, calming the child. Her voice, even cracked with fatigue, had warmth in it, a tone that didn't belong in a place this empty. When dawn came, the light was pale and cold. He stepped outside, scanning the horizon again. The ground still bore the scars of old hoofprints leading toward the canyon. The world smelled of dust and rain, and something metallic. Memory, maybe. She joined him at the doorway, the baby wrapped tight in a blanket. The wind caught her hair, lifting strands across her face. "You think they're coming?" He nodded. "Not today, but soon." Her eyes didn't flinch. "Then we don't wait." He turned to her, a flicker of surprise. She was pale, worn, but there was steel under her fear. "You can barely stand." "I'll manage. I'm not dying here." He studied her, then nodded slowly. "You've got grit." "I've got a child," she said simply. They packed what little the ranch offered, a canteen, a knife, a wool blanket. As he saddled the old mare, she stood in the yard, gazing east where smoke still drifted from the wreck. For a moment, her expression softened. "He would have liked you," she murmured. Cole glanced over. "Who?" "My husband." She looked down. He believed men could be better than what they'd done. He tightened the saddle strap. Then maybe he died still believing. The words hung heavy in the cool morning air. They rode out as the sun lifted, the sky bruised with stormlight. The baby dozed in her arms, the horse's hooves thudding against hard earth. Behind them, the ranch faded into a shadow against the hills. Ahead, the trail curved through dry grass and scattered pines, leading toward an uncertain horizon. For now, there was quiet, only the steady rhythm of hooves and the whistle of wind. But Cole's eyes kept flicking to the ridgeline. Somewhere behind them, far off, a black plume of smoke still rose. The woman held her child close, and he rode beside her, silent but watchful. Both of them knew the fire hadn't truly been left behind. It had only changed its shape. The storm rolled in before noon, sweeping over the plains like a living thing. The sky turned the color of old steel, and the wind carried a dry, bitter scent of dust. Cole rode ahead, his eyes scanning the horizon, while she followed close behind, clutching the baby against her chest beneath a worn shawl. They'd been on the trail for 2 days now, heading north toward the foothills, sleeping in abandoned sheds and creek beds when night fell. Neither spoke much. The silence between them had grown into something familiar, almost companionable, a quiet forged by exhaustion and necessity. When they reached the ridge, Cole reined in his horse. Below stretched a shallow valley dotted with dead cottonwoods, and an old line shack slouched against the wind. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney. "Someone's there," he said, voice low. She shifted in the saddle, uneasy, friend or not. He studied the tracks leading down the slope, fresh, too deep for a single rider. Not. They left the horses behind a rise and crept closer on foot. Cole moved like a man who'd done this before, quiet, cautious, his body angled with purpose. She followed, holding the baby close, so he wouldn't stir. Through the cracked window of the shack, they saw 3 men hunched around a table, rifles leaned against the wall. One of them held a map marked with a serpent coiled around a river. Cole's face hardened. He'd seen that mark once before, burned into the side of a wagon. "They're hunting us," he murmured. "Then what do we do?" she whispered. "Stay ahead of him." He motioned for her to retreat, but a loose stone betrayed them. The nearest man looked up, eyes narrowing. "Who's out there?" Cole grabbed her arm and ran. A gunshot cracked behind them, splintering bark from a nearby tree. They ducked behind the ridge, sliding down the slope in a rain of dirt. He shoved her toward the horses, firing back once the slow pursuit. The thunder of hooves followed as they fled across the open plain. The wind tore at their clothes, grit stinging their faces. When they finally lost sight of the riders, they stopped by a dry creek bed. The baby was crying, terrified by the noise. She rocked him gently, murmuring a lullaby too soft to hear over the wind. Cole dismounted, scanning the ridges. "They'll track us," he said. "We need shelter." They rode another hour until they found a hollow beneath a cliff, half hidden by scrub and stone. It offered little comfort, but it was enough. As dusk fell, Cole gathered brush for a small fire. She laid the baby down on a blanket and sat nearby, silent, her eyes fixed on the flames. The wind outside howled through the canyon, a sound that felt almost human. Cole crouched beside her, passing a tin cup of water. "You ever shoot before?" She looked up, startled. "No." "Then you'll learn. They won't stop coming. You need be ready." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not helpless." "I know," he said evenly, "but you're not trained either. I've seen too many good people die thinking they could talk their way out." She studied his face for a moment. The faint scar near his temple, the lines carved by years of wind and regret. "You've done things you regret," she said quietly. He didn't deny it. "Plenty." The firelight flickered between them, gold and restless. She reached for the revolver, lying beside his knee. "Show me," she said. He handed it to her, guiding her hands with rough patience. "Don't squeeze the trigger till you're sure. Breathing's the key. You rush it, you miss." She took aim at a rock a few yards away. Her first shot missed by inches, echoing sharply through canyon. The baby stirred but didn't wake. She tried again, jaw clenched, and this time the bullet struck stone with a satisfying crack. Cole nodded. "Better." They practiced until her hands stopped shaking. When the fire burned low, he leaned back against the rock wall. "You did good." She didn't smile. "Good won't be enough if they find us." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was heavy with truth neither could ignore. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, and the echo lingered long after. By morning, the storm had passed. The world smelled of wet earth and pine. They saddled up and rode west, following the river's curve through canyons streaked with sunlight. The land here was wilder, boulders the size of wagons, trees bent by wind. Cole led them to a narrow pass where an old homestead leaned against a slope, its roof half collapsed. "This'll do," he said, dismounting. "We can rest here a few days." She glanced around. "You always know where to hide." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Spent years looking for places no one would follow." They cleaned out the cabin, patched the broken window with a torn blanket, and drew water from a nearby spring. For the first time in days, they ate something warm. The baby cooed softly, fascinated by the firelight. As night deepened, she watched Cole fix a broken hinge with quiet concentration. There was a steadiness in him, a man who'd learned to survive by expecting the worst. Yet beneath it, she caught glimpses of gentleness. The way he handed her the tin plate first, the way he tucked the baby's blanket closer without a word. "You never said why you left the railroad," she said. He paused, tightening the screw. "Didn't leave. Got run off." "For what?" "For asking the wrong questions. The company didn't like men who noticed the bodies buried under progress." She stared at him. "So you knew what they were doing?" He nodded once. "Didn't know enough soon enough." Their eyes met the glow of the fire. Two broken lives bound by the same wound. "Maybe that's why you didn't leave me," she said softly. "Maybe," he admitted. The wind rose outside, rattling the loose boards. He went to the window, peering through a crack. The moon hung low over the valley, silvering the trees. "They're out there somewhere," he murmured. "You can feel in the ground. When men like that start riding, the land knows." She joined him at the window. The night looked calm, but she could sense the truth in his words. The calm before something worse. Later, when she laid the baby down, she found herself unable to sleep. She listened to the steady rhythm of Cole's breathing as he sat by the door, rifle across his knees. The glow of the dying fire carved his features in amber and shadow. He looked like a man made of endurance and ghosts. "Why do you stay?" she asked suddenly. He glanced over. "You and the boy need someone who can fight." "That's not an answer," she pressed. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Because maybe, Savon, you gives a passive reason not to haunt me." Her gaze softened. "You think redemption comes from protecting strangers?" "I think it comes from not looking away again." The words lingered between them. Outside, the wind stilled. The world felt momentarily suspended, the way it does before dawn breaks. A faint sound cut through the quiet, the distant creak of saddle leather, the jingle of spurs. Cole's head snapped up. He motioned for silence and moved to the window. 3 riders approached from the east, dark shapes against the moonlit plain. He doused the fire with a swift motion. "They found us." She clutched the baby, eyes wide. "What do we do?" He loaded the rifle, his voice calm. "You stay behind that wall. Don't move till I say." The first rider fired a warning shot that shattered the window pane. Cole returned fire, the recoil echoing through the small cabin. Splinters flew. The baby began to cry. She crouched low, covering him with her body, whispering to calm him though her hands trembled. The gunfire didn't last long, just flashes of light and sound in the dark. When it ended, the silence was worse. Cole stepped outside, checking the bodies. Only one man was dead. The others had fled into the hills. He came back inside, his shoulder bleeding. She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against the wound. "You're hurt." "I've been worse." Her hands shook as she tied the cloth tight. When she was done, he caught her wrist lightly. "You did fine." She met his gaze, her voice breaking. "They'll keep coming, won't they?" He nodded slowly. "Till someone stops them." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "Then we stopped running." He stared at her, surprised by the resolve in her tone. There was no weakness there now, no fear, only fire. "We'll need a plan," he said. She lifted her chin. "Then let's make one." Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain again, mingled with gunpowder. Cole looked toward the dark hills where the riders had vanished and felt something shift inside him. The fight he'd been avoiding his whole life was coming, and this time he had something worth dying for. The baby stirred, reaching a small hand toward the flicker of firelight. She held him close, whispering, "We're not running anymore." Cole sat back, exhaustion etched across his face, but his eyes were alive now, sharp, steady, ready. The night stretched silent and uncertain beyond the window, but for the first time they both faced it without turning away. The fire roared like a living beast, swallowing the night as smoke rolled over the dying train. Sparks rained against the desert wind, and the cowboy's arms tightened around the woman who trembled in his grasp. Her dress was torn, streaked with soot. Her lips cracked as she gasped, "Leave me! Save our baby." The child lay wrapped in a soot-darkened blanket beside them, crying through the chaos. His hat was gone, his face blackened from smoke, but his voice was steady. "You're my world," he said, his words low and raw. Then he lifted both her and the child and ran into the burning wind. The prairie beyond the wreck burned in small patches, glowing like dying stars. He staggered across the sand, lungs on fire, boots crunching through broken glass and cinders. Behind him, the train shrieked as metal twisted and fell apart. He laid her behind a dune, his hands trembling as he poured the last of his canteen over her scorched cheek. She tried to push him away, whispering that she was too weak, that he should take the baby and go. He ignored her, staring into her eyes with that quiet stubbornness that once drove her mad and now broke her heart. Hours passed before the storm came, black clouds rolling in, a gift and a curse. He built a small fire under a jagged rock face, wrapping her in his coat, while the rain began to fall, hissing against the flames. The baby whimpered, and she sang a lullaby through her pain, a voice trembling yet soft. He watched her, haunted by what nearly was lost, and what still could be. Lightning flashed over the desert, carving light into the horizon where the sheriff's men might be riding. They had to move before dawn. By morning, the rain had washed the world clean, but left the air cold. He found a stray horse wandering the wreck's edge, its mane tangled with ash, its flanks streaked with burns. He calmed it gently, whispering, feeding it from his palm. When he led it back, she was awake, pale but alive, her eyes glassy with fever. He lifted her onto the saddle, holding her steady while she clutched the child against her chest. The horizon stretched endless, red canyons, mesas like sleeping giants, the sun bleeding through thin clouds. He mounted behind her and whispered, "We'll make it to the valley. There's a doctor there." The road was cruel. The horse stumbled more than once, its hooves sinking into mud and gravel. Coyotes watched from the ridges, shadows with hungry eyes. At dusk, he saw smoke, maybe a cabin, maybe something worse. He left her hidden under an overhang, pistol ready, and went ahead. The cabin stood crooked at the edge of a dried-up creek, one lamp flickering through the window. He peered through the cracks, empty but for dust and silence. He returned, carried her inside, laid her on a cot, and fed the child warm milk from a tin cup. She looked around, dazed. "You can't keep saving me," she murmured, voice breaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he took her burned hand and wrapped it carefully with a strip of his own shirt. His fingers brushed her skin like an apology. "You're not a burden," he said quietly. "You're the reason I keep breathing." Night settled, heavy with rain. They sat by the fire as thunder rolled far away. She stared into the flames, remembering the sound of the explosion, the faces on the train, the screams swallowed by smoke. He poured coffee, black and bitter, and told her about the men who caused it, the robbers who'd set fire to the train for gold that never existed. "They'll be tracking survivors," he said, eyes dark. "They'll come for us." Her hand found his. "Then we'll run again," she said. "Together." The next morning proved her words true. Hoofbeats echoed through the canyon, sharp and distant but growing closer. He doused the fire, grabbed his rifle, and lifted her onto the horse with the baby. "If I don't come back—" "You will," she said, cutting him off, voice fierce despite her weakness. He rode to the ridge, the wind tearing through his coat, dust blinding his eyes. Below, 3 riders moved like wolves across the land. He recognized one, the scarred man from the wreck, the one who'd lit the fuse. Rage flared in his chest. He took position behind a boulder, waited until they drew close, and fired once. The shot cracked across the desert. One man fell. The others scattered, shouting, returning fire. Bullets chipped stone beside him. He rolled down the hill, landing hard, his shoulder screaming. But he kept firing, pushing forward, pulling them away from her. Back at the cabin, she heard the gunfire, clutched the baby tight, and prayed. Smoke rose from the ridge. Then silence. She didn't wait. She grabbed his revolver, her arm trembling, and stepped outside into the wind. When he returned, bleeding and limping, he found her standing at the doorway, gun raised, eyes steady. Behind her, the baby slept untouched. He smiled faintly despite the pain. Didn't think you'd still be here. Didn't think you'd be late, she shot back, lowering the weapon. He fell to his knees before her, too tired to speak. She pressed her hand to his cheek, her thumb tracing the dirt and blood. You came back, she whispered. Always, he breathed. They stayed until dawn, too exhausted to move. The rain had stopped, and the desert glistened in the sunrise. He watched her sleeping beside the child, her face peaceful for the first time in days. He thought of how close he'd come to losing them, on the train, in the storm, on that ridge. His hand brushed over her hair, a silent vow forming in his chest. No more running, no more fear. By afternoon, a rider appeared in the distance, an old friend from town, waving a white cloth. He brought a wagon, supplies, and word that the sheriff had captured the rest of the gang. It was over. The cowboy helped her climb into the wagon, careful not to wake the baby. As they rode toward the valley, the wind carried the smell of sage and rain, the sound of distant bells from the small church beyond the hills. At the doctor's house, he stayed outside while they treated her burns. He sat on the steps, staring at the horizon, the ache in his body matched only by the one in his heart. When she came out, clean and bandaged, she smiled softly. You didn't have to wait. I wasn't going anywhere. They settled in a small cabin by the river weeks later. The land was quiet, green after the rain. She tended to the garden while he mended fences. Their lives rebuilt piece by piece. Sometimes they spoke of the fire, but more often they spoke of the future, of raising their child where no trains burned, where love wasn't something you had to fight for every mile. One night, as the sun bled into gold and crimson, he stood behind her, arms around her waist, the baby asleep nearby. You ever think about what you said? He asked. On the train. She turned, puzzled. What did I say? Leave me, save our baby. His voice was soft now, almost tender. She smiled faintly. I was wrong, she said. We needed you both. He kissed her forehead, his hand resting over hers. The river shimmered in the fading light, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers through the open window. Later, as the night deepened, the storyteller's voice would return, the old man by the campfire, flames dancing in his eyes. They say he never spoke much about the fire again. He'd murmur to the circle of listeners. But every evening when the sky turned red like the blaze that tried to take him, he'd hold her close and whisper the same words he did that night. You're my world. The fire cracked. Sparks rose into the dark, and the story ended the way all good stories should, with silence, warmth, and a sense that love, no matter how battered, still survives a flame. Night settled softly over the valley, the cabin glowing like a lantern against the endless dark. The storm had passed, but the air still carried that sweet, charred scent of rain and pine. Inside, the fire whispered low, casting slow-moving gold across the walls. She stood by the window, the pale light brushing her hair. The cowboy watched her from the table, hands still rough from the day's work, heart heavier than he'd admit. For a long time, neither spoke, the silence between them not cold, but full. He rose, walked toward her. When she turned, their eyes met. No fear, no firelight tricks, only truth. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, tracing the soft line of her jaw as if memorizing it. She leaned into his touch, her breath trembling but calm. The kiss came like something long promised, gentle at first, then deepened by everything they'd survived. It was a language of its own, carrying gratitude, grief, love, and release. The fire cracked quietly, shadows swaying over their joined silhouettes. When they parted, she rested her head against his chest, the rhythm of his heartbeat grounding them both. He wrapped his arms around her, not with urgency but with reverence, as if holding proof that life could begin again. Outside, wind stirred the pines, brushing against the cabin walls like a lullaby. Inside, warmth replaced what the flames had once taken. The way of the world, the fire, the fear, the long nights, fell away until there was only the hush of two souls finally at peace. Later, as the fire dimmed and starlight slipped through the window cracks, he whispered against her hair, "No more running." She smiled faintly, fingers tracing the scar on his hand. "No more." The light flickered, slow and tender, painting them in gold before fading into quiet. Beyond the cabin walls, the land slept, and within, their hearts did too, together, whole, healed.